And I could see that for many years I had been working against myself, being critical, being judgmental, pushing my feelings aside. And it's really having that healthy balance of recognizing your feelings and then knowing what to do with them and how to handle that. And that's part of, the work now, which we can get to. And just being present, like being aware of what you're doing in that moment, because that's where a lot of the mental tension and anxiety and depression, worry comes from, is you're either so worried about what's going to happen in the future, you're so in that anticipatory stress that doesn't actually exist.
Let's link up with Krista on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What's going on, FYX listeners? Welcome back to our latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krista Huber. And if you are catching us on YouTube, you see my lovely co-host sitting in my lap. You might even hear her in the microphone if you catch her picking up the licking of my face. But Bean and I are back, and we are welcome today by yet another fantastic guest for the FYX. We are so close to 200 episodes, and I don't care how many times I say it week after week. I am honored, grateful, and just so happy that podcasting is a way to connect with such intelligent, smart, really present, really self-aware people. And those last 2 points hit hard for today's guest, my new friend Tahira. Tahira is a fellow coach, but she specializes in an area that, if you've been a longtime listener of this show, or if you've at least checked out the show within the last 12 to 15 months, I've spent a ton of time exploring my own relationship with self-development coaching, how it kind of fits into my life as a form of therapy, why I think it's a better version of approaches to therapy than the more traditional ones around like CBT and different things like that. And Tahira walks us through her journey, her story that led her from somebody who thought she was on the quintessential right path, the best path, the expected path, doing well in all areas in life, to not even noticing and not even recognizing that she was having a physical, visceral response to stress, and to then categorizing that as burnout at a time when that language wasn't really as common as it is today. And I think this conversation is really important because burnout has become, in some ways, a little bit of a, for lack of a better word, like politicized term, because I think there's people who use it out of context. I think there's people who don't actually understand what it means. And Tahira is completely changing the game of that. Talking about her life experience, talking about what got her to the point she is today, to actually tying in these concepts to get past burnout with science, with practical tools, with all of the methodologies that parallel to how we think about fitness and nutrition inside of the Fitness FYX. You'll hear me say this in the episode, but a lot of what she describes as her own interactions and experiences with going from being the person who could never meditate in her life to then going on a 10-day silent meditation. And what that just cracked wide open for her is very analogous to how we think about tools like food tracking, tools like getting to a place of being able to intuitively eat, to improving your relationship with food. It's all connected at the end of the day, and being able to master your emotions, or at the very least be in touch with your emotions and understand them, to better understand your thoughts inside your head, to realize that it's important to be kind to yourself, but then to actually go and do it and feel like you have, again, the tools to be able to execute. That's the sweet spot that Tahira really hits on with her coaching. So you'll hear us mention this towards the very end of the episode, but it's important. So I wanted to bring it up right out of the gates here in this introduction before I toss the mic over to Tahira herself. But Tahira is actually offering a chance for you, the listener, anybody who tunes into this episode, to access one of the coaching programs that she herself went through via Google. It was an experience that she had back in, I want to say 2019, where she was able to get certified in this special approach and really actually understand more of the science and the tangible aspects of this. And she's offering a course for it for individuals because in the past, through her coaching services, it's only been available to companies where she would come in and basically train companies, smaller businesses to give access to their entire staff for this. But now you, the listener, as an individual, can get in on the benefits of everything that you'll hear her talk about over the course of the rest of this conversation. And I would strongly urge you guys to check it out because I've done similar work to this in my life. And it's truly, I feel, changed the way that I see the world, the way that I see myself, the way that I communicate, the way I show up, the way I coach, the way I am in every role and every relationship that I have in my life. And it's just been really profound and something that I know will continue to serve me as I navigate the one thing in life that's guaranteed: change. So go to the show notes, check out all the details. The course itself will become available through Tahira's coaching in April. And we'll keep you guys posted on social media with the dates and all of the things. So make sure you follow along with her, connect with her on LinkedIn, because that's where she tends to be most active in the world of social. And with that, let's kick it over to Tahira for the FYX podcast. Tahira, welcome to the FYX podcast. I am so excited to have you. I know we've been chatting for the last few months and getting things on the calendar to make this happen. The FYX listeners are in for a treat with hearing about your life experience, your work, your perspective, and everything in between. But before we dive into all the good stuff, as you know from listening to my show, I like to ask all of my guests what your go-to coffee order is. What are you sipping on in the morning? If you're not a coffee drinker, that's okay. You can just tell us like what you do to kind of get the morning routine going for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a morning water drinker. So
Nice.
I have to get at least like half a liter in. And then, yeah, I don't drink coffee per se.
I pegged you as a type who wouldn't. I feel like I kind of knew that before I asked.
Yeah, I get too frantic. Like it's too stimulating for me. So it's like it's just not, and then I can't sleep. So if anything, I have like the instant decaf, which everyone hates and gives me crap for. And then I mix it with some raw cacao powder and like a bit of
Hey,
coconut
that sounds
to
good.
make like a homemade mocha. So that's my water and homemade mocha.
I
That's
like it. I always, you could say that people give you crap for that. Half the time, the people who come on the show are like, my coffee order is boring because I'm a fitness professional. So obviously, I typically stick to like black coffee. So we get all the variety, but I should put that in quotes because half the time people say the same answer. And you know what, girl? The part that matters is that you know your body. And this is
yeah.
what I always say. Anytime a guest is not a coffee drinker, the reminder to the listener, I do this question like purely for fun because I love coffee, but it's
Mhm.
also a way to kind of show you how people, regardless of your background professionally, think about their health. And I think coffee is one of those things that so many people just either assume that everyone drinks it or don't really think twice about how it may be negatively impacting you. And yet, what's fascinating about coffee is it's like one of the most researched, we'll call it like a supplements category, so to speak. But in terms of like something we consume, it's like one of the most researched areas, which is really cool because there's pros and cons to it. And I like the fact that I think it's one of those things that for whatever reason, we've been able to like all agree to disagree on. And yet there's many other topics in the fitness and nutrition space that people
Yeah,
cannot agree to disagree.
that's true. We
So
don't fight about it really.
yeah, nobody fights about it. It's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And like we look at the science to back it up. If only we would do that for more things, then I think people would
If
have
only.
an easier time losing weight among a lot of other things, just like navigating life in general. But
Yeah.
anyways, that said, I want to go right into the juicy part of the conversation. And I'm excited for your response to this, just me knowing your background and the type of work that you do with your clients and in your consulting. I think you'll have a really good answer for this. So before we share with the FYX listeners and set you up for, the whole like rundown on your resume, who you help, how you got into this space, etc., I want to take it a step further. And I would love to know if I were to ask you, who is Tahira at her core? What's your answer? What are you saying? Like, forget the resume pitch, forget the elevator pitch, and tell me, like, on a deeper level, who are you? And then why should we continue to listen to the rest of this episode?
Yeah. This is a question I didn't think about actually before,
That's okay. I like
before,
I
but it's
like for it to
good.
be very organic. So that's
It's
perfect. I'm
good.
glad you did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say, I'm a lover. I'm like a soft kind of lover girl. I love to just
Oh,
love people. I'm a big, like, I wanted to be in the space of having more compassion and kind of like scaling compassion in the world. I'm also a pretty big badass. Like,
yeah.
don't cross me, like I have a very like soft tender side and I have a yeah, let's not go there, you know? Um, so yeah, pretty strong duality, I would say, which I think shows up in a lot of the rest of my life, which has been interesting for me to recognize and accept. But yeah, that's what I'd say on a deeper level. And I just like want
I,
people
yeah,
happy,
I
Like I
love
think
that.
we need more peace in the world, more love in the world,
Yeah.
and people who are like willing to be more confident and stand up for
Mm.
themselves, to help the world just be a better place.
You bring up a really interesting point about like the duality of those two things and like the contrast between the two. Because when I think about it, and I'd love your take on this, like female to female, right? And for a female audience out there, when you think about the fact that like you have that like lover girl side and you want to have that compassion and what we would classify as like the true femininity, it's interesting that as a woman, we even have to like say, oh, but at the same time, I'm also a badass. Whereas,
Mm.
like, I almost wonder if a man was making a statement to describe themselves, if they would even think about those two things as like butting heads in any kind of way, right? Because I do feel both of those things from you for sure. And we've only had the connection via Zoom a couple times, but I too do like even through your content, like I get that sense from you, the way you talk, your tone, all of these things, where I'm like, yeah, I sense this level of compassion, which is why you're a great coach and do the exact work that you do. But at the same time, we both know to be entrepreneurs, to do the type of work that we do, it requires a level of confidence. It requires getting over that imposter syndrome. So as you think about like where you've kind of been over the last 4, 5, 10+ years, whatever, like what kind of things do you think has allowed you to arrive at describing yourself that way? And do you think it's something that as a female, like we kind of teeter between the two things and have to like explain why we're one way versus the other?
I would say I mean I think as females, women over explaining is just like a natural,
Yes,
almost
of
like it's
course.
not actually natural,
Yeah.
but it's like we have this feeling that we have to do it all the time.
Yeah,
So I think that's just one thing that we should just put on the table and kind
for
of get
sure.
there. I think, yeah, I can see that if a man were to answer that question, he probably wouldn't have, this like necessary need for the duality of it, because he's just like kind of in this one way. But
Like
I
this
think,
is how I am. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think also in the work that I do, it's been it's been a piece because coming across, mindfulness and emotional intelligence in this work can be seen as such a soft, like passive, like fluffy kind of skill
Mm-hmm.
that that's not who I was before I found this, and I didn't know that I needed it. So I think it's important when I talk about myself in this way that it's a clear distinction of you can be any kind of which way, but these tools are universal. These skills and techniques are universal. Um, because people I mean, there is like a reputation, of those kind of techniques.
Oh, for sure.
Fine. It's fine. It's just, yeah, I have my own take on it. So I think that is, I guess, unless you want to dive into more of like the where it came from and like the more of the fuller story, because I think that really flows into how and why I identify myself that way and speak about it that way.
Yeah, please go for it. I think, the one thing that just stood out to me when I first connected with you, and I shared this with you previously, like I kind of fell into the camp of where you were before as well. Like thinking there was a certain connotation with this work around emotional intelligence and mindfulness that was almost like too soft, that me being somebody who identifies as like the strong personality, being in more of that masculine energy most of the time, I didn't realize until I started doing it how much better my life could feel and be, and the quality of the relationships that I could have, the way that I communicate, the way that I lead my team, the way that I lead my clients, the domino effect of every aspect, that it was like, wait a second, like it's not serving you to only be this one way. And how can we tap into this, but make it our own? And I think that's the
Mhm.
point you're really landing on too, is like, because these are just tools, that also is really analogous to what I think about with nutrition. It's like, tracking your food, for example, put that in the category of something like meditation. It can be done multiple different ways. Doesn't need to be done every single day, doesn't need to be done to a T all of the time. And the fact that you recognize that it's a tool that can kind of come in and out of your life as you see fit is, to me, what makes it so powerful, because the one thing in life that's guaranteed is change. So kind of bring us into the backstory for you personally, whether you want to start with like your journey from your corporate experience to now your business. Like, please take it in
Mhm.
any direction that you feel makes sense for kind of where we're at in the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I guess I'll backtrack to going into university where
Yeah.
I had no idea what I wanted to study, to be honest. I was not like a science girl or a math girl or history or like anything. Like I didn't like fit in a bucket, it felt like. I was just
Mhm.
a very shy, quiet kid. And I remember going through the process of what should I take in university? My whole family is entrepreneurs in the business space. So I was like, maybe I'll take business, I guess, because that's kind of all I knew,
Sure.
And I remember going through the list of programs with my brother, and he suggested, I think you're really like, you're sweet, and I think maybe a people role would be good. How about human resources? And it was literally just process of elimination. There was nothing else that could be a fit. I was like, I guess so, but I'm also really shy, so wouldn't consider myself a people person in a sense.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, went on to take business, specialized in HR, and I really broke out of my shell in university, which was the best thing ever. Like I went across the country from where my family was. I grew up pretty strict household. So, I wanted to be far enough away that I couldn't get like a random weekend visit. Love them.
I get
Um,
that. I totally get it.
yeah, but not so far that it would be like a crazy, long flight. It was about 4 hours.
Sure.
So
Okay.
it hit the spot.
Yeah.
Loved university. I really got to just understand myself a bit more and kind of explore, as university can be. And then, yeah, and then I got into the working world and HR at the time. This was back in 2010. HR was very new. Human resources
Hmm.
was very new and fresh, and I could not get a job, even just an internship. Nobody would even hire me for free, confidentiality or this issue or that issue. So
Sure.
I started in IT. It was the only job I could get, but it was in a good company that I wanted to be at. So I started there and worked my way into HR at this organization after about 3.5, 4 years working I guess after school. And I was really excited about being in HR. So this felt like a dream job for me. I was living in Toronto. I had my own apartment. I had a good job, a good like partner at the time, and lots of good friends. And I thought I'd made it. I was like, I've made it. This,
Figured it out. Yeah.
this is, yeah, like this is this is the end. This is the pinnacle.
Yep.
I've hit all the check boxes. Life is good. And I just became miserable. Like something was missing. I started getting really miserable. I put on a lot of weight. I became really crabby. I started getting a lot of stomach pain every day I'd come home from work, like literally crippled over with stomach
Yeah.
pain. And I would just curl into my bed every evening, not know what to eat that would make it better or worse or what was happening. Um, and yeah, it's like I just had no idea what was going on. I felt like I was really being punished for following the rules, which was mad. And I was very angry about it.
Confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I went to see all these doctors. I did all these tests. Everyone said, you just have IBS. You got to like live next to a washroom for the rest of your life. And I'm like, I'm
My
sorry.
least favorite diagnosis to
What?
ever exist. It's so frustrating. And
Yeah.
I knew that like you were going to touch on this, and I'm really glad that you're diving into this point of the story.
Mhm.
So, like as you started getting this feedback, I'd love for you to expand even further before you say like the solutions that you turned to.
Mhm.
How did it feel for you as somebody who knew something wasn't right, but you were convinced, like, okay, just throwing this like blanketed diagnosis, in my opinion, that's what it is, on me is just labeling me and not actually giving me a way to figure this out. And like it sounds like you just knew intuitively, like that was not how your existence was meant to be. And I find this is an important point to touch on for somebody who is not in the fitness and nutrition space specifically, because there are people listening to this who have been in that exact position and honestly still believe that just because a doctor told them
Yeah.
that, like, this is it. And I do a lot of work to try to change their perception of that reality. Like, you're not broken. And I think you're somebody who could really speak to that sentiment from having experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. We can dive into that a bit more. So I would like go to work feeling okay in the morning, and then throughout the
Mm-hmm.
day, I started to feel more kind of like I was shutting down internally,
Yeah.
really miserable and not happy. Um, and then by the time like the afternoon, evening came, I would be in the washroom multiple times, like multiple times. And maybe even to backtrack for some people who don't know, like IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. Um, and it was it was very bizarre. It was very confusing. I was like, I'm a good human. I'm just like going to work, contributing, coming home, doing my thing. I just want to care about people, which I'm doing through my work in HR. And I felt really angry, very helpless because I did like all the tests. Like when you when you like poop in the cup or you like collect
Yep.
your stool samples,
Yeah.
I was like, how is this happening to me? I'm 23, 24. This is it just felt so surreal and in the worst way possible. Like I was living a nightmare. And it was the same cycle over and over every single day. And yeah, there was no solution or let me figure it out with you. I just was passed between different doctors, did all the allergy tests, nothing came up. And I'm like, am I broken? Something's wrong. Is this just going to be me for the rest of life? Like, I'm just starting. I'm living in Toronto. I love it here. I'm doing work that, is meaningful to me. Um, and honestly, I was just like, yo, I followed the rules. Like somebody messed up. I want to swear there, but somebody messed up, you know? And I was really helpless and was just like, how am I going to travel? How do I even know what to eat? What is okay? What is not okay? Everything was like wrong. It felt like everything I chose was wrong. Everything I thought was wrong. Um, so I just felt like shit out of luck, you know? Um,
Yeah. I mean, I have clients that have gone through similar experiences and it makes you super afraid of food. And on top of that, like you're saying, like the fear of
yes.
traveling, like the fear of breaking your routine. And it's really cool knowing like the lifestyle that you lead now, where this is going to take us and like the direction that
Mm,
it's going to go. But like it is a very helpless feeling. And I think it's really interesting. I'm sure a lot of this has to do with like the, you know, mental aspect and like the meditative work that you've been through and continue to incorporate into your own personal practices, but also through your coaching, you keep coming back to this point of like feeling like you're being punished or you'd been following the rules and you were doing everything right. And I wonder, like, did you see that right? Like, did you have those thoughts and feelings like right away in the moment as you kept getting these like basically like inconclusive answers from doctors and continuing to feel this uncomfortable? Or was that a story that you felt like it took a little bit to perpetuate, like after, 6, 8+ months of you kind of being in this state where you weren't getting any
mm.
relief?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure exactly when that kind of fell into place. I do remember in the moment I felt really angry
Mm-hmm.
because it was just like something wasn't clicking and something
Yeah,
wasn't working, and I had followed the rules in the sense that throughout my life growing up, I was pretty directed by my family, my parents, like this is your value, this is your belief. I wasn't really taught to think for myself, to be honest. It was like you follow these rules. If you
sure.
don't feel well, you put a smile on your face. We still have to go to this auntie's house. We still have to go, here for this event, or we still have to go to dinner. We still have to do things. So there was a lot of suppression that was happening. So there was a lot of like in the moments when it was going on, I was very confused because I didn't really have that faculty in my mind to pick
Sure.
things apart. It was just, well, I'm being told that I have IBS and this is what's happening, but something was in me that was like, I don't want this to be the reality. I didn't necessarily know that there was a different solution.
Right.
It was more anger and fear. And I think over the years, then I really realized how, because I think that played a part of it's so important to learn how to trust yourself. And I didn't get the opportunity for that until later, I think, in
Later.
life,
Yeah.
which was really hard. And I know my family and parents did the best they could. Like it wasn't, anything intentional in that sense. It was
No.
what it was. Um, so yeah, so I'm like, well, I just would take the information and then
Mm-hmm.
so I'm like, okay, now I just have to live this way forever. And I just became so fearful of life, to be honest, of like living, of anything that would go wrong. Like there was so much control. At least if I controlled what I could, then at least it couldn't get worse. And I would always be,
Worse.
even though
Sure.
it was like in the negative,
Right.
maybe it couldn't get worse.
Relatively. Yeah.
Yeah, relatively. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it was just like you can like the fear couldn't get any bigger if you controlled as many variables as you could, right? And it
Yeah.
was like that playing safe, I think also kind of speaks into the narrative a little bit too, because it's like the whole concept of like following the rules. And you bring up such a good point that I think is sometimes kind of skipped over when we talk about like what we're really kind of getting at too is the, patterns of like inner child work and like how your childhood informs the way in which you see the world. And I
Mhm.
think so often, just like due to like a lot of different voices on the internet and just like the collective, like societal misunderstandings, let's say, sometimes I feel like when people bring these topics up in particular, they forget to make the statement of what you just said, that like it's not everyone's case that there was some like big traumatic event. And that doesn't mean that like somebody in your family like intentionally did something wrong to you, because we have to remember like everyone's just working off of their reality, and their reality was informed by their childhood and the person's
Mhm.
childhood before that, right? So it's this cycle to where, of course, when it's a really horrible situation and it's something that is like black and white, very morally negative or wrong, or involving like a big T trauma, as people like to refer to it, everyone can understand that and be like, well, yeah, like, okay, I can kind of understand like how I got from here to here. But I think sometimes because people are, I don't know about you, but like my personal experience around this subject matter initially was like, oh, well, like if things are not going the way I expect them to, I shouldn't be upset or I shouldn't be ungrateful because like nothing bad, relatively speaking, like happened to me in my life. So like there's nothing wrong. Like this is just what it's supposed to be and I'll figure it out. And that's like a really hard place for people to kind of sit, because then you feel like, okay, well, I'm not allowed to like feel some type of way because nothing, morally or to that level of like I keep saying big T trauma happened to me. But then you also don't want to be in this situation where you're coming across like you're blaming somebody, because it's not about that. It's just more like accepting the fact. And like I've been able to reach this point personally through a lot of inner child type of work and that style of meditation, of just kind of recognizing like this is just like what is like, and that's what informed my reality, and that's how I internalized these things. It wasn't because like my mom said this one specific thing, and I've actually had this conversation with my mom multiple times, because she feels as a parent like this sense of responsibility of things that have happened like later in my life. And she's like, I don't know why like you had this impression. And it has nothing to maybe do with what she said. It's just like intrinsically something inside of me and the way I interpreted things at like 4 years old, and the lasting impression that that left. So I appreciate you giving it that context, because I don't know about you. I think you'd probably have more to say on what I just said than me because of what you now do day to day. But I feel like it's something that's kind of misunderstood, like when we talk about some of these things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, fully agree. I think there's not necessarily one like defining moment, and also all
Right.
parents don't know what is going to work for the child or what's not, or
Exactly.
what the child is going to internalize at certain moments.
Right.
Because yeah, like I've done some of my own inner child work, and I can see some moments that were very impactful for me. But when I
Sure.
look at it from like an objective view, I'm like, that was just a conversation, or that was just like
Right. Like why?
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, but it's all these little things that compound.
Add up. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then I think for me, it all led into this one big headway of getting this sick and all these things happening where yeah, I was a very good like order taker, as a kid.
Mm.
I just like followed. I was like a the good kid,
Yeah, I could get
Like,
that vibe from you for
you're
sure.
so
And
you're so
that kind of goes back to
nice.
like the lover girl piece, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
some of that like is aligned with that too. Like it can fit in like a similar bucket. So
yeah.
just to keep like on, in the timeline of like where you're at with these things, you kept getting like passed from doctor to doctor. You started to recognize like, hey, like I got to control the controllables here and just like hope that I can minimize the symptoms as best as I can. What
Mhm.
was the big shift for you? What changed that would then honestly inform like your career trajectory and a lot of other choices you've made since?
Yes, I remember I was walking on the street with my friend in Toronto and I was telling her a little bit about what's going on. She's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I've had some digestive stuff too." She said she went to see this naturopath, different type of doctor, right? And she's like, "You should go and see her." And I'm like, "I don't know, but that sounds a little bit out there, you
The
know?"
woo woo.
A
Yeah.
little bit woo-woo, yeah. And she's like, "Yeah, just go see her." And I was like, "Okay." And this naturopath, her clinic was actually like literally at the end of my street. So I'm like, "Okay, might as well go." So I went to see her within like 5 minutes. She's like, "This is classic burnout." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think so. I'm too young for that. Like, this can't be it." She's like, "This is stress." And I was like, "I think you're wrong. Like, I don't I don't get stressed. I think there's nothing for me to be stressed about, just like push it aside." Anyways, turns out it was stress. She was right. It was correct. And we did like a deeper, yeah, we did some deeper, just, tests and things to figure things out. And it was the first I'd ever heard of stress coming up physically, having physical symptoms, really even, I think, talking about stress. I mean, you're stressed as a kid in university, but also you're like when you're doing exams. But I mean, then you just go hang out with your friends for the night and like have a good time and everything's
Yeah.
fine,
And you feel like
you
you
know?
compartmentalize and whatnot. And I think like
Yeah.
that's an important point to bring up. And it's like, well, of course you wouldn't recognize this because going back to the stories that we may tell ourselves, going back to the way that we grew up, going back to whether or even connecting this to like, what did you believe about yourself in terms of like high achievement, right? And like tying your value. Like, I know for me personally, like I've been through these burnout experiences myself. And like a lot of it actually came down to recognizing that I have tied so much value and like my definition of success to like output and work and like working harder that in a lot of ways, this all comes down to like one major challenge that if you've always operated that way, if you've always seen the world that way, how are
Mhm.
you a good person to spot the fact that something is wrong? And I think this is universally a challenge that a lot of women experience. I think men can experience it in different categories, but as somebody who can't speak for them from not having gone through those experiences myself, I get like perspectives from clients and like friends and guy friends that I talk to. But I think for women, like another really good example that kind of poses this problem is thinking about your cycle. And so many women deal with these really serious PMS symptoms that myself included. I've always justified it because I'm like, well, I've been like this since I was 17 and, maybe even when I was 15. And like, I don't really remember because ever since I've ever gotten a period at like age 12, this was always how I felt. But
Mhm.
that doesn't make it okay. Right. So then we apply that same kind of sentiment to something like this concept of burnout or this concept of stress. And you're like, well, I've always operated at this degree. I seem fine, but like, are you the best person to actually define the word fine or good? When it's your own
Yeah.
life, you might not be.
Yeah, definitely. It's why we all have blind spots. Like you can't see your own problems a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time. That's where our comfort zone can be, can hold us back in that space, right? Like we get comfortable in our comfort zone, because you're comfortable in that pain. It's just what you've known or you've become
Sure.
conditioned to it. So it was it was very alarming that it was happening to me in a very physical sense,
Mm,
which I'm sure had happened before. I just didn't realize it, or
right.
it was in smaller ways. So this was very shocking and alarming. And I mean, even thinking about telling my parents this, I was like, this is me being a failure. Like that's how I equated it. Because yeah, growing up, I was
Yeah.
always kind of told to be the lawyer, the doctor, like the
Mm-hmm.
accountant, like those kind of professions. So when I went into business and HR, there was support, but there was already like okay, well then you should go back and do your MBA or become a
Yeah.
lawyer, right? Like do more,
I can relate. I get
have
it.
all the
Yeah.
professions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this was happening and I'm like, okay, well now I'm burnt out. What does that even mean? How do you even deal with burnout? What does that even what even is this? Because this was in 2014, so this was what, 11 years ago now.
Yeah.
Burnout wasn't a thing, wasn't talked about. It was like shameful. Also, I was in HR and I used to be that HR that would look for the resume gaps. That'd be like, "Oh, this person has a gap on the resume, that's an issue." And I and then here I was like had to quit my job to
Right.
look after myself. So I'm like, oh my God, now I'm gonna have a resume gap. Like this is
Yeah. Or even you're like
terrifying.
questioning, like, was I potentially like misunderstanding these people's resume gaps? Because what if they were going through this and they didn't have the language for it either? Like, you bring up such a good point. I feel
Yeah.
like the concept of burnout like didn't really take hold until I would say like at least most
Oh,
recently and like widely until the pandemic, right?
yeah.
Because the whole, like, again, just like to relate it back to the female audience too, I think like there were conversations about it as it relates to like postpartum and things like that. But it really took like more of a presence and like stronghold online when a lot of people were talking about like how do you navigate remote work and your child also being in some remote version of school, and just
Mhm.
like that lack of separation of you being pulled in a million directions and then having the physical connection to kind of be figuring out like multitasking and whatnot. And then people also realizing when they took the commute away, when they took like, you know, the extra
Mhm.
outside stressors to kind of figure out how we could maybe work more efficiently, a lot of these concepts, I think, became a little bit more magnified. But, you know,
Mhm.
before we even get to that point, like for you personally, you make this decision to quit your job. And then how does that eventually snowball into you realizing, like, wait a second, I can help contribute to changing the narrative on this and now bringing you to where you are today?
Yeah, so essentially I went on a journey of just learning about stress, learning about burnout, really kind of behind the covers, to be honest. I kept it really hush hush. And I had to do some studying and digging. And I didn't even really share it with my parents, what I was really, yeah, going through and navigating. Um, and when I came back to Calgary, where my family was, there was a lot of other just like personal upheaval in the family that was going on. So it really felt like full on rock bottom. And I was like,
Mm.
I have not been taught how to deal with this. Like, I just know some textbook things about HR. Like, nobody prepped me for this. So it was like it got worse in a sense. Um, so then, yeah, I like took to some reading some books. I started reading some self-help books, just Googling stress, Googling burnout, trying to learn more about it. Obviously, my naturopath had given me some supplements and some things to help as well along
Sure.
the way. And what ended up happening was there was a lot of still like stuff that needed to be, dealt with. And so my
Mm-hmm.
naturopath suggested I go to learn how to meditate. And in this time of me like learning about how to manage stress, I listened to basically all of Tim Ferriss's podcasts, all about optimizing your health, and your time and your energy. And everybody he interviewed would talk about mindfulness or meditation or having some morning practice, usually like the Ariana Huffingtons, Richard Brunson and all of these, yeah, like big names. And I'm like, really? These people are meditating? Like they're doing this? It seems so bizarre. So my naturopath suggested I learn how to meditate. I tried Calm, I tried Headspace, I tried all the apps. I just would sit there and be like, okay, when is the 10 minutes up? Okay, it's up. It didn't really help, but I did it. Like I
Yeah.
went through the motion of it. And I
Yep.
was like, it's not helping. It's not doing it. So I ended up going to a 10-day silent meditation course, um, which when my naturopath suggested it, I was like, you're bonkers. There's no way in hell I'm gonna
Yeah.
go
Like
sit
to
down.
go totally silent, like the thought of that, I mean,
Yeah.
kudos to you. Yeah. I don't know if I
Yeah.
could do it.
Yeah. Well, I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so in the beginning. And then I went back 2 months later and I was like, so I'm on the wait list for that. We'll see if I get in. And then I got in and I went and I remember it was a 3-hour drive from Calgary and I remember driving there and I was on the phone with my brother and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm turning around right now. I'm turning the car around. I was like literally turned the car around. He's like, go to the course. You're gonna be fine. It's gonna be okay. Both my parents were pretty skeptical. So, it was not very helpful, I would say, for me to go and do this from their perspective. My brother was very supportive, went to the course, and it was life-changing. It was really, really life-changing because I couldn't turn to anything else. Like the 10 minutes was not up for 10 days.
Days. Yeah.
It was like it was painful. Would be up at 4:30 in the morning, you're doing a meditation. I thought it was as fluffy or woo-woo or as loopy as like the average like anybody, I'm like very skeptical of it. But I felt like I had no other choice. I felt like it was my last resort. Um, because my mind wouldn't stop racing. I couldn't figure out things, like where I wanted to kind of work, how I can help myself, what was actually going on internally. Like I couldn't figure things out. So that's why I did this course. And it helped me to calm down. It helped me to learn how to not turn away to all the distractions that we have. We have so many distractions at our disposal at any given time. And this program was so painful because there were no distractions. Like, there's no reading, there's no writing, there's no journaling, there's no like yoga. Like, it's literally just meditation. There's a few breaks in the day. You eat 2 meals. You could go for a walk. I did this in December into January. I was there over New Year's. So it was like minus 40
Yeah.
Celsius.
So probably not too many walks were
Yeah,
happening.
not much for walks.
Yeah.
It was really just meditating and like pushing past my own comfort zone, pushing past my own limits to, we all have like a window of tolerance, right? Of
Oh,
discomfort.
yeah.
And so this was like the only way to expand it is by exposure. You have to push the edge.
Sure.
And so that's what I did. And I learned how to be uncomfortable and do it anyways. When people say feel the fear and do it anyways,
Mm.
we talk about those things, but we're not taught how to do them.
Do them. Yeah. Great point.
So that was a lot of, yeah, what I went through. And there was so much that came from that course, um, really impactful. And just also seeing that at the end of the course, we were able to talk to each other when you break the silence. And I remember meeting this one lady who had said, we're all sharing about our experiences and like what brought us there. She said, in the past 2 months, I've lost a partner, a parent, and a child. And I decided to come here to this course. And I was like, damn, like there are so many other coping mechanisms. There are so many other things that people do to handle grief and pain and loss. And for someone to come and like sit for 10
And
days
get
and go,
hit like that, like all within an 8 week period, like it's hard enough to lose one person. Like that's, I
it's a
mean,
lot. It's a lot.
yeah,
Like I thought I'd had it hard and I was
seriously.
like,
Yeah,
damn. But we all have our own stuff. So it was really
sure.
inspiring to see that there were people there who wanted to work on on themselves. And this course is free, so it's all run on donations. So there's like no
Wow.
barriers to it. It's really like if you want to be a resilient, you know, MF, then go. And then like go and do it and face yourself, face your mind. And honestly, there's nothing scarier in this world to me than like being with your own thoughts and facing your,
Yeah.
because
And
that's
the,
terrifying.
it is terrifying. And like the point that you hit on here, because I've actually had this come up in conversation before. And I've talked about this a lot, like with one of my own coaches who I mentioned to you previously, does similar work to
Hmm.
you. He challenged me a few times, like in the last year, to not listen to music, not listen to any
Mhm.
podcast. I am a podcast junkie. Like I listen to podcasts probably more than I watch Netflix, more than I read. Like I listen to them all day long. My friends make fun of me, but they're also like mildly impressed by the fact that I can like concentrate enough to like take in the information from the podcast while simultaneously creating content, writing emails, etc. Like I prefer listening to a podcast even over music, to be honest. And the more that I dug into it with my coach, the more he pointed out to me of like, hey, you're actually listening to these podcasts because it like tricks your brain into thinking that you're being more productive because you're learning and you're doing these things. And like, I also had this piece of my identity wrapped up in the fact that like I could be a multitasker like that. And people would come to me and be like, do you have a podcast rec for this? And I like loved always having one like ready to go that I wanted to share. And so it was very hard for me to like break away and like do this assignment of like just going for a walk. We call them abundance walks. No
Mhm.
phone. I do have to take my phone nowadays because it is my way of getting into my apartment, but I keep it in my pocket. And it's like
Mhm.
no headphones, keep your phone out of sight, don't touch it. And I remember the first few times I tried to do this, like the idea behind it being an abundance walk is like observe exactly what's happening in front of you. So, like being in New York, it's really cool because there's so much going on if you pay attention. But then also, like, look at the buildings just to be like, holy shit, at one point this didn't exist. Or like, holy shit, there's hundreds of thousands of people in this one building right here. Like, just take that in. And the first few times I did it, it felt so hard. Like the instant like desire to just want to reach into my pocket within 5 minutes and start looking at my phone was painful. And I'm like, I don't want to be this reliant on this technology. Like, why am I? So to your point, like everyone needs to remember the things that we're saying that are distractions, it's muddy because they're not necessarily quote unquote bad distractions, right? Like you even said, yoga, moving your body, journaling, those can all be very productive tools. But I think it's a really, really key distinction here to make, to be like, we're talking about the next level beyond that, like being with your own thoughts and just having to listen to them and seeing what comes up. And in this case, choosing to actually listen to it versus push it down, push it to the side, whatever. So you could probably say way more on that too. Like if you take yourself back to when you did that experience, like does anything like really still stick with you today about maybe like how you kind of check in with yourself, or like how your relationships to your relationship to your thoughts has changed and evolved from having done something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that has stuck with me from that. It was so impactful. I went back a few years later and did it again.
Oh, cool.
In January of 2020, and then I went another time and helped serve in the kitchen as well
Nice.
for a few days. So I've had, some touch points with it, and
Sure.
but generally like the first experience was, it was I laugh because it's like it's not funny, but it's funny in the sense that it felt so extreme. Like
Sure.
the part of the practice is to just sit and watch your mind, not like engage with it at all, but just like as if you're an observer, just watching
Observe
your
it.
mind. I
Yeah.
was like, holy shit, my mind is fucking nuts. It is wild. Like here to here to here to here to there to this thought to this feeling to like I was just like, I am tired watching this. This is insanity. It's just nuts. And I could see in that moment how my mind has just been taking me on this freaking ride. Like
Mm,
I'm on the roller coaster of my mind wherever it goes. And our mind is conditioned by so many things outside of us until we decide, no, we're not doing this anymore. And I was just like, hell no. This bitch is mine. Like I'm not
yeah.
nobody else gets to control this. This is mine. So I'm gonna take control. And I realized how much of an asshole I had been to myself, how hard I had been to myself, how just mean I had been, critical, judgmental, and I'm like, I'm just a human. Like I'm figuring this out. I didn't even know I've been doing this to myself. Again, we think about like our childhood. How are we taught? How are we spoken to, right? You did this wrong. This was right. This like there's black and white thinking, you know? At least for me, that's what it was. So that was something that really stuck with me. And I also realized in that course that self-love for me and self-care is hanging out with myself, just spending time with myself in that particular way where I can observe myself and see what's going on and then be like, is this a belief I want to have? Is this a thought that I believe is true versus it just being on autopilot? And I feel like I truly understood self-care for me in that moment, which was, yeah, just being there and then figuring out how to be my own cheerleader. Because when you hear that, nobody's gonna be there for you like you. And yeah, I'm like, because I felt so misunderstood for a lot of my life.
Mm.
And this was like I'm understanding myself. And now, how can I learn to work with myself versus like against myself? And I could see that for many years I had been working against myself, being critical, being judgmental, pushing my feelings aside. And it's really having that healthy balance of recognizing your feelings and then knowing what to do with them and how to handle that. And that's part of, the work now, which we can get to. Um, and just being present, like being aware of what you're doing in that moment, because that's where a lot of the mental tension and anxiety and depression, worry comes from, is you're either so worried about what's going to happen in the future, you're so in that anticipatory stress that doesn't actually exist. Like it
No,
doesn't
it's
exist.
literally not the reality. Like it's a reality you're anticipating. I had a mentor
Yeah.
literally say this morning on a call, like two
Yeah.
hours before we sat down for this, she mentioned like she was talking about her own experience of like being in that state of
Mm.
like somebody who didn't have the best relationship with money growing up. And now she has an abundance in her life that like she remembers like each period of like getting to the next level and then getting to the next level and like what that looked like for her. And she said one of the biggest things that she's realized is like as she's continued to grow as an individual but then expand as an entrepreneur, that yes, it's like the whole saying of like new level, new devil, sure. But she was like, I also realized like some of these devils were things that I was creating. And then as a result, I was wasting energy that could have instead been spent on either one, towards something that was going to help her get to that next level, which is more of that like part of your brain that wants to go do more work and like do the thing and be more productive. Mm-hmm. Or if we can transcend to an even higher state of consciousness, like allowing herself to be bored, because that boredom, aka the presence, is where the really good ideas can start to come up too. So if you are the person listening who wants to be more productive, who wants to get to the goals, who wants to lose the weight, who wants to get the new job, etc., like I think a good question to sometimes ask that I never, if you told even 2022 me that I'd be saying this right now in 2025, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, because I couldn't get on board with that. But now I'm like hearing someone say this to me and I'm like, that is so true. I learned that in 2023 and 2024. It was the best lesson I've ever learned because it's now carrying me to these new phases, to new things I'm doing in my businesses, to the way I want to be showing up as a podcast host, as a friend, as a coach, as a sister, all the different roles that we play. So I really love that in particular, because I feel like so many people, like even kind of what you were mentioning earlier about like people saying like, oh, like you need to be your own cheerleader, but like, how do you actually do that? Sometimes I think like we have the same challenge when it comes to this idea of like practicing presence, because who is really teaching us how to do it? Right. And like you threw yourself into the thick of it of like, hey, you want to learn how to be present? Like, this is how you go about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it was a very hard lesson, but that's, what I get to do now in helping others to break it down into a very practical way, because it is so convoluted and it's so like conceptual and like mystical of just be present. Like, and that's where what I also thought it was like bogus.
Yeah, that's what we were saying before about like the badass masculine side. Like to me, it's a thread to that. Like that's where the bogus side of it comes from, because we're like, how can that be true? Right.
Yeah. Like it's either that we're, worrying about the future, we're ruminating over the past, we're overthinking about the past, an email you sent, a conversation you had, anything. And that's the stuff that I find that's what kept me up at night. And that's what keeps a lot of people up at night. And learning about how to be present in this way that was it was like forceful. Like there was no, I was like forced in a sense while I was there, and there's like a video discourse every evening where they teach you kind of like the next step of the process. And and he would say every day, make the most of your time. You only have 10 days here. And I'm like, every day feels like 17 hours.
So long.
It is so
it feels like the longest day of your life.
Which really also was that, time is an illusion. Like we make it's so bloody true. Oh my God. Those were the longest 10 days of my life. I was like, get me out. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I will say by the end of the course, I was the last one to leave the meditation room, because you leave and you go into the dining hall and then you break silence.
Okay.
And I was just like, I don't want to leave. Like, I'm not ready to come out of this yet. Yeah. It was very impactful. And so then I just felt like this is stuff that people need to know. Like that people need to have access to these tools without me saying like, hey, Krista, go and sit in silence for 10 days, and it was like, this is something I wanted to help people with, to find a way to, and I didn't even know how I was going to do that. I was just like, I feel
you were
like
this needs to be accessible. Yeah.
And then fast forward a little while, I came across this program. I was looking for another job in HR. I was looking for something maybe in wellness or, benefits or something, so that I could bring out some of this mindfulness or this meditation. But this was now back in 2018, which was not really a thing.
Still weren't there yet. Yeah. Like,
we weren't there yet.
You were like on the cusp of all of this. And then again, like I said before, like I still think like inching closer to the reality of that timeline was more like 2020, 2021.
Yeah. yeah, so we weren't like fully there. And, I ended, anyways, I came across this program called the Search Inside Yourself program, which is the mindfulness and emotional intelligence leadership course that was developed at Google. So it's rooted in neuroscience, scientific studies and findings. And I was like, yo, this is more my speed. Like this is it for me, you know? So I saw that they were taking applications to become a teacher. But to become a teacher, you have to take the course first, of course.
Okay.
So I went in December of 2018 to San Francisco and took the 2-day in-person course there. Loved it. I was like gung ho, like I have to become a teacher of this. I submitted my teacher application and got accepted in January of 2019. And then started a year-long training process between kind of like remote and then also in person at Berkeley, to become like do a deep dive of how to teach this content and really how to
That's
not
so
just teach
cool.
it, but like embody it.
Yeah,
Like you have to like live it to be able to teach it, which I
totally.
loved.
And
And I
I
had
think like
already.
I just want to say one thing here about the embodiment
Mhm.
piece because like it shows up in really small examples that I don't even know if you do this consciously anymore, but like this context is so small, but to me so important. We had connected like I think like right before the holidays when we
Mm.
first met. And so obviously it was a busy time and you had some travel coming up and we were kind of like just going back and forth and having a conversation and being like, okay, like let's consider doing a podcast. And you were like, send me the info. So many people would send an email being like, hey, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you because XYZ thing came up. You didn't word it that way. And I think that's like a very intentional distinction because there's nothing to be sorry about when you told me that you had like, hey, I got a bunch of things going on in the next 4 to 6 weeks. I'm super interested in this. So send me the information. And your response to your email to me is very intentional. And I'm curious if you do this on purpose, which is why I want to interrupt what you're about to say here. You wrote back like, thank you so much for your patience. I've been traveling and like I did have a chance to dive into this. I think that's a very different judgment of yourself by choosing to use that language because there's nothing, like I said, there's like nothing to be sorry about. Like, I hate when people apologize for things like that because, like,
Mm.
I'm busy too. And we already established like the timeline and expectations that it's like, yeah, no worries. Like, whenever you want to come on the show, like, cool, you can come on the show, right? So I
Mhm.
wonder if like is there an older version of you before this work that maybe wouldn't have answered that way or is that just something that like is now like on autopilot?
Yeah, 100%. I would not have responded that way, I think, before. I was like classic people pleaser, classic, like when I say like polite back in the day, it was just, oh,
Yeah.
sorry for this. Like sorry for existing. That's
Yeah.
basically what I was like. I used to play so small.
Mm-hmm.
And even still, like I brush up against the edge of that, like being louder or bigger or like not apologizing for our existence. It's
Yeah.
like yes, I know I had told you what was going on, and I genuinely was actually more in the state of thank you for being patient versus I'm so sorry. Like I feel like I already kind of preempted that to begin with,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
so it was like,
So there's nothing to apologize for. And yet people do that all the
yeah.
time.
I think the other piece that we miss is that, like, when we say I'm sorry, it's also making it about me versus
Mm,
saying thank you for, your patience. That's about
sure.
you. Like, this is also like your show. I'm grateful for
Sure.
you to have me. Like,
Yeah.
it also
Fair.
makes it about the other person. And I think in our world, we're very self-centered and it comes from many places, right? Whether we just have to look after ourselves, I get that, but
Sure.
also like our insecurities or our people pleasing. It's just
Mhm.
very like, like we're so much fear. And I
Yeah.
think that if I can it all starts with us. So every move I can make that helps, maybe give like that feels more true to me and give somebody else like
Totally.
permission as well. Because sometimes with some of my friends, when we'll voice note each other back, with my really good friends actually, it's like if it's a few days or something, she'll be like, "Tahira, I'm so sorry, it's taking me." And I'm like, "Can we have one day?" I was like, "Look, girl, we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop apologizing. I know you'll get back to me when you can. There's no like you have a life. It's fine."
Right.
If it's something urgent, I'm gonna call you or like you're gonna
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
know?
you're gonna
So
know. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, we
No,
have to
so
stop
true.
this incessant apologizing and also apologizing. I think people do it from a also like a non-genuine place. It's just
Mhm.
like a fear place. I'm so sorry.
Sure. Yeah,
So I
sure.
think that
No,
there's a lot
I
that
wanted
goes
to
into
call that
that.
out
But
because
thank you.
like when you met, like as soon as you said the word embodied, this was on my mind for like the last 5 minutes. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I really want to bring up this example because it's
Yeah.
something that like, to me, that represents embodiment of like you being able to kind of say, okay, like I found this way of learning this practice or these
Mhm.
multiple practices that ties it into the science that made it feel less woo woo for you, which also made it resonate with you even more for you to then go
Mhm.
out and be like, okay, this is giving me like the foundation of a blueprint of how I can go teach this to people. But to your
Mhm.
point, like you're not just like saying that for the sake of saying that. And to me, that's very evident in such a little example, like how you choose to write things. Because I think
Yeah.
like if it wasn't fully embodied, no one would have even picked up on like what I noticed and the way that you wrote that too.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for pointing that out. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that you have your like your own levels of self-awareness, of course, that you've
Mhm.
worked on to recognize that. So yeah, and I think this like the coming back to the Google course, it was really transformational in that way because it gave me a lot of that language
Okay.
that I usually speak. Right? Like the
Sure.
meditation course was felt pretty woo-woo for me. It was out there. Like there was the gong and everything. And I was
Yeah.
like, shit. This is a real deal, you know? But the course really, yeah, gave me that language and it gave me the structure. And there's scientific studies that we talk about,
Mhm.
around the negativity bias and why we are the way we are and
Sure.
steps, like Dr. Kristen Neff talks about steps and stages to how to be compassionate with yourself, how to apply self-compassion, which I just love. And like, because yeah, I am, was, whatever you want to say, have type A tendencies. I love spreadsheets. I love frameworks. I love like steps. Because when somebody says be present, I'm like, okay, how? Like, tell
How?
me
Yeah.
how to do
Give me
that.
the instructions.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And I think that's something that's really missing in this space that I uh,
Agreed.
do my best to try and close the gap and educate on and help
Mhm.
people really apply it through my coaching or the workshops, however I kind of am bringing it out at that time. So, yeah, that's kind of how I arrived at the Google program and how what was the big transformation for me was I guess it wasn't like one main thing, but it was
Sure.
really the learnings of mindfulness and the practicality of it and the embodiment of it and of emotional intelligence and understanding you can feel a certain way and I can feel angry and I can try and break shit or I can feel angry and be like Krista, I'm really upset about this. Like there's different ways to talk
Yep.
about it or to
Yeah.
handle our emotions, but we're so on autopilot and it's wild to me because even in the workplace, people are like, oh, I don't bring emotions to work, or I don't do this, at work, or I'm not a very emotional person. But it's such a clear example
Yeah.
of they're like, but I came home and lashed out at my kids. And I'm like, oh,
You're like,
cool.
well, there you
So,
go.
but you're not emotional. They're like, no, no, I'm very good at compartmentalizing. And I'm like, no, we got to talk about that because we are humans. It is just a fact that we have emotions. And it's wild to me that we've never been taught how to handle them. And even in a role like HR, after learning these skills, I'm like, e- you'd think if there's any kind of profession or job, it would be HR to handle
That.
people.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It seems like it's like a bare minimum requirement as like a
Yeah,
prerequisite of like something you
yeah.
have to have on your resume. And I see a huge parallel to that with food too, because like
Mhm.
the one thing I say to my clients all the time that is like the minute I say it to them, this light bulb goes off, but yet it's like so just the facts that it's like kind of crazy that you don't realize it. No one
Mhm.
ever teaches you how to eat. Food just gets put in
Mhm.
front of you. Let's say you were breastfed or on a bottle, whatever. Then at some point you get switched to table food. So you have to understand that as an infant and then as a toddler and through your child development, like you don't have autonomy around food. So now here you are at age 25, 30, 40.
Mhm.
I have clients that are almost 70 and they're like, really what we're actually doing inside of my nutrition coaching is teaching you how to eat. And when you say that to the person, they're like, I've been eating my whole life. And it's like, okay, well, it's not working out for you, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
like something, you don't feel well, you feel like something's missing for you, you're lacking confidence, you want more muscle, whatever, like insert whatever goal. It comes back to the fact that, like, you didn't learn how to eat, and then we'll layer the emotional aspect into it. If you also don't learn how to deal with your emotions, well, it's kind of like, no shit, you turn to food
Mhm.
to deal with some of these things. Like, it's literally not your fault.
Yeah.
And two things can be true at the same time, though. It might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to learn. Right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's where people like you and your take on coaching, like to me, I think the work that you do is so important because I really feel like, in my opinion, for how beneficial this type of work has been in my life, I think this should be like the gold standard for therapy because you're not ruminating when you do this type of work. You are
Mm-hmm.
actually, even if you look into the past, even if you do some sort of an active meditation, like some of the things we were describing with like inner child work, it's the only type of work in the self development space that I've been able to do where I actually felt like I then got the instruction manual to be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. Now that this is coming up for you, let's try to execute on these things versus no shade to like cognitive behavioral therapy, but it never worked for me. And the reason why it never worked for me is because I would leave this person's office thinking that I felt better, only to find myself just being like, well, do I feel better because I just like released all the thoughts I had in my head for the last hour? Yeah, because then a day later, I'd go back to feeling bad because I didn't walk out of there with like some sort of like solution. And that's the type A personality screaming to be like, well, we want to be able to move through this and navigate these things as life continues to change. So obviously, I'm
Yeah.
all about it. And I think that's a really perfect segue for you to then kind of take us to like, okay, you did this Google course, you become really ingrained in this methodology. And now you're at a point where you're like, I have this experience with HR, I have this corporate experience. So I want to go ahead and really figure out ways that I can teach people this, whether it's one to one or whether it's through a lot of the consulting work that you've shared with me, which I think is so cool to be able to partner with different companies and hear that companies are actually willing. I know you've had your experiences where some didn't understand you, but knowing that like a lot of companies are really open to this and want to invest in it, I'm like, hell yeah. Like this is like, I think this is something that I want everybody to have access to. So for as much as you were saying before, like this is your show, this is your podcast, I'm like, come on, girl, because we need more people to get on here, get on board with this and be able to talk about it. And you could just speak to it in a way that's at a much higher level than me. Like I can share from the, like the participant and that experience, but you have that additional level of education of like, well, here is the research, the studies, the science behind it, the practicality, et cetera. So I love being able to use this platform to even have conversations like this because I think they're so important. So kudos
Mm-hmm.
to you for everything you're doing, but also
Yeah.
please kind of give us a little bit more of the detail. I know that you do have upcoming workshops and programs that you're launching too. So what if somebody is listening to this and is like, oh, this is speaking to me, but I don't really know how to get started or unpack it, feel free to give us the rundown on what you have coming up in the next few months.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do work with clients one-on-one. That's where people see the most impact. And I want to touch on something specific you mentioned with the like
Yeah.
the ruminating piece, when people are ruminating so much. I find that there's like four main sections of that really trigger a lot of anxiety for people and a lot of the clients
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with. And
Okay.
that's overthinking and ruminating, people pleasing, digital overload and distractions, and self-doubt. These are like the four main ones that I see, and it's like so habitual habits, habitual habits, autopilot habits that we don't even realize it's happening. And one of my clients, she came to me in the beginning and she was just like, I like can't sleep at all. I'm always overthinking this email, this client meeting, whatever it is. She's an entrepreneur. Within 2 weeks, we were able to reduce her overthinking by 80%. And she's like, I've just gained so much time back in my day. I don't even like know what to do with myself.
Yeah. And now she's
Yeah.
like, how cool is this? Because, like, at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, all she wanted was to be more productive. And it's like,
Yeah,
hey, guess what? You already had all the answers inside of you.
exactly. Exactly. You want to be more productive and also just more peaceful. Like you're not just like here to be on all the time, right? But
Right.
it's like
And
when
give
you're
yourself
resting, it's
permission
resting.
to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so, as the kind of type A overachievers, high performers overthink 1 to 2 hours a day. When you crunch the math on
I
that,
believe that I would totally say I've been in that headspace for
yeah.
sure. And then
Yeah.
the math on that, you're right. That's like wild.
It's like 5 to 10 hours a week. If you are at the 10 hours, I think when I crunch it out, it was like 48 days out of a year you spend overthinking.
Over a month.
It's insane the amount of time that we spend over. And when you think about this from an organizational level too, right? When organizations have top performers that are overthinking this much, like how much how many dollars are wasted,
Right.
right?
Like that's a
Effective.
no-brainer marketing tactic for why companies should invest in this type of support. Like
Yeah.
how much more do we need to show you that this is going to be a great ROI for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean yeah, it's it's wild when you get into like the numbers side of this like soft work. There's something soft about it. And these skills are what makes you more confident and courageous, you know? But anyways, went off on a bit of a tangent there. Okay, so how you can kind of learn more.
Oh, this was good.
Um So yeah, either reach out to me. I do lots of one-on-one work. I work through a few different steps of a process with clients. We do an assessment to identify where those time and energy leaks are in those four sections. And then we move to an awareness stage to realize where those things are coming up and when in your day they're happening. So we have assessment and then action, assessment, awareness, and then action, where we put little micro practices around it to help stop
Amazing.
those energy leaks. And then amplify, where we build specific routines that are like lifestyle changes for you that integrate with your day. So that's how I work with clients one on one. And yeah, at the end of April, I am running actually the Google course open for individuals. So I only have offered this within organizations. So I've delivered it at like GoDaddy and Co-Management Health and a few other organizations, um, and this types of work in different companies as well. But this year, I'm bringing it out in a way where individuals can sign up for
That's
it. So
amazing. How exciting.
something new. So yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing it out because lots of people have been asking me about it. Individuals and even just like small businesses, that want to send some leaders in. And for people who just want to learn more about themselves, learn how to put mindfulness into action, how to, what emotional intelligence really is and the different domains of it and how to practice it and use it to your benefit. Yeah, we do a deep dive into that, and it's about one-third content and two-thirds experience and practices. So it's really highly experiential, and you walk away with a lot of the tools and tangible
Hands-on.
learnings of it. So yeah, that's the main excitement thing coming up, which I'm really like. I'm super excited about it. I'm really looking forward to doing it this
I'm
way.
pumped for you. Yeah, that's
Yeah, thank
fantastic. Because
you.
I obviously, when we first connected, I knew the story about the Google class, but that was a
Hmm.
question that I had for you too is like,
Yeah,
how can the average person, if they're not
yeah,
exploring
yeah,
this like to that capacity, how can they kind of like get their taste for it? But you obviously have us plugged right into the answer. So we will
yeah.
definitely make sure we link all those resources down in the show notes for people to just
Mhm.
one, simply connect with you, but two, if they're interested in taking it that step further. I think, that's one more thing to underscore that we have said a couple of times, like you said, with it being two-thirds experiential, like that is the important part of all of this, because as we've
Mhm.
been saying, calling it, whether we've called it woo woo, whether we've called it something that just like doesn't feel as accessible, I think it's just so important for the type of approach that you take to this work in particular, that you're creating that environment for people. Love
Mhm.
the framework, like as you were describing the framework, again, the type A aspects of both of
Yeah.
our personalities,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I can get behind that, because you're also making me feel reassured that like this is something I can kind of like actually wrap my arms around, versus
Mhm.
just trying to understand it conceptually. And then maybe if I don't understand it conceptually, I know a past version of me just assumed that it wasn't meant for me, or it was
Mhm.
inaccessible, or it wasn't going to be a solution that I could ever even consider. So I just, like I said a few minutes ago, like really appreciate you and the way you're able to voice this and just kind of talk through your journey. And obviously that can resonate like experience for experience with people who have maybe been in that state, that somebody could be listening to this and be like, I've been diagnosed with IBS a million times over and I've never thought about it in the context of stress. Like, and if that's something that comes up for someone from this, even if just one person gets out of that takeaway, that's why I love doing this. And that's why I love podcasting. And, just one other note on being present too. I think that podcasting has allowed me to become like one of the most present versions of myself, because when we think about tech and we think about what you said earlier about the digital distractions, this is the one time in my week, and I usually record at least an episode or sometimes two if I'm trying to get ahead every single week. It's different when it's just like me and my own thoughts. That's one version of me being present. I don't
Mhm.
like script these shows. I don't plan what I'm going to talk about other than just like one topic. And maybe when I'm like thinking about it in the shower, when I have that time to have the space of being present, then I'll be like, oh, I'm going to expand on this. I just turn on the camera, plug in my mic and go. But then at the same time, when I have a guest like you, I'm like, my computer's in do not disturb, my phone's in do not disturb. I'm not thinking about like, oh, like, yeah, I'm looking at the time because I'm like, I know I could probably talk to you for 3 hours. But at the same time, like I get such a like selfishly satisfaction out of this podcast that people ask me often, like, what does it really take to do a podcast? And I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it's easy because it's not. It takes, if you take it to the degree that you like want to be really proud of the work that you're putting forth with it too, it's time consuming. It is an investment, even financially as well. And for me, like, I just have like such satisfaction off of it from being able to actually have conversations like this, right? Like that's something about it that I'm very grateful that it's like one of those applications, so to speak, or one of these tools, so to speak. I've chosen to use it as that type of tool and like have that relationship to it, but it's really awesome. And I think like just a very full circle point to kind of make as we've talked through these ideas of presence, these ideas of like actually listening to what's kind of going on in your mind and then challenging yourself to do it, right? Like you said, like pushing yourself to the edge of actually doing these things. So all that to say, well, yes, I would love to talk to you for hours and hours. And I know that, you know, you're speaking my language, that's for sure. I do want to be respectful of your time and let you go. So with that said, I'd love to just ask you one more question. And as we have worked through a lot of different angles and topics today, and hopefully leaving the listener with a few different things to think about, if somebody could only take away one thing and like be left with one point from your story, your journey, your coaching as it stands today, what would you want them to take away from this episode?
I think there's 2 coming up for me.
Give us 2. Give us a bonus.
Okay,
We like
so
a bonus. Go for
the
it.
bonus. I like that. I like that. Okay, so one is there is life beyond burnout. You can get unburnt out. That's 1. And 2 is life will be what you make it. Like you create your reality. You really do. And you have a lot more control than you think. So that would be, I would say, the takeaway.
Love it.
Yeah, is that. And also I would like to mention that I'm happy to set up a discount code for your listeners.
That would be amazing.
For
Thank you. Yeah,
the Google program. So we can throw that in the notes or something somewhere.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate
and get that set up. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of my clients would really benefit off of it too. So we'll make sure that everybody, whether you listen to the show or even me just sharing it with them directly, for everyone inside of our Fitness Fix community, I think they would really enjoy that. And even some business owners that I work with, I think could get some benefit out of it too. So I'm excited to be able to spread the, you know, and share the wealth of all of your knowledge and get as many people thinking this way or like kind of just getting into that self-awareness state, if anything. So thank you for offering that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, before we totally let you go, where is the best place to stay connected with you if somebody does want to reach out to you about coaching, where they can follow along for more of your content? I know you're pretty big on LinkedIn, so we'll make sure we share that, but I'll put all of your handles and things down in the show notes. What's the best kind of channel that you hang out the most on to get connected with you?
Yeah, the best channel is LinkedIn for sure. I share the most frequently there, most content there. Instagram is sometimes it's a bit more like the BTS or, you know, the behind the scenes stuff, a bit more personal about me. But yeah, LinkedIn definitely is a good spot. So love to hear from anybody. Hit me up, send me a connection request, say hi, say that you heard about me from the podcast and would love to connect there.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for all of this. I really appreciate you. I'm so glad that we were able to sit down and make this recording happen, and just excited to continue to follow along on your journey, support in any way that I can. And I know that I'm really excited for the feedback from this episode. So that is a cue, as we always do at the end of each of these conversations, to our listeners to please make sure that if you got even like 2 minutes of a little bit of support or something new, or this made you think in a different way, share the episode, share it with somebody that you think it would benefit them. Maybe you've been at a point in your life where you want to start to have these types of conversations with people that are close to you, but you don't know how. I think podcasting is such a great way to do that in a way that's like a little less pointed, but more of just like a conversation opener, right? So share the episode with a friend, throw it up on your Instagram stories, share it on LinkedIn if it compels you, and make sure you tag us, of course. But as always, we appreciate you guys for tuning in, and from wherever you are listening from, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will catch you guys next week. Thanks, Tahira.